deal with them, do they? Whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. You step up and you deal with them. We had a man south side of Forest Park, south side of Atlanta, and he had his PhD in divinity. He had written books. He was a very intelligent man, very well educated as a Christian, but he would place membership at different congregations, and he'd be there a little while, and he would start to stir up trouble for the elders with the members. He would agitate things. And he had gotten a reputation on the south side of Atlanta with the churches that he causes trouble for elderships. Well, he started showing up at Forest Park. Didn't say anything to the eldership. Started coming Wednesdays and Sundays, and this went on for several months. He never talked about placing membership. He just was coming and talking to members. And so we decided to have him in for a little talk with the elders. And we told him, your reputation precedes you, and we're not here to discuss that. We're just telling you, that's not going to happen at Forest Park. Okay? You're welcome to stay, but you're not going to cause problem for us. When you do, you'll be gone. And he wanted to argue about it. We said, nope, there's no discussion. This is just an information meeting, okay? That's the deal. It's not going to, what you did at this, you're not going to do here. Meeting's over. That's the last we saw of them, and that's okay. That's okay. We just aren't going to let those things happen in the church. Just too important. Consistent application of biblical principles. It's God's will, and the inconsistency will quickly be noticed by the congregation, affecting the trust and the respect of the elders. We can't have a double standard. Now, if we apply a certain biblical principle to one situation and we don't to another, which is the same situation, then we're going to be called hypocrites and favoritism, and we have to be consistent in our application of biblical principles when we deal with situations in the church. Again, I mentioned one face to one face to the congregation. Create a sense of ownership in those members who are primarily responsible for implementing your decisions. We've talked a little bit about this, about renting a house versus owning a house and who takes better care of it. And we're talking about include those who are responsible for implementing your decisions in on the planning process. Seek their input, stress their importance in the outcome, periodically ask about the work and encourage their efforts, empower them with the authority necessary to successfully carry out their assigned responsibilities. Accountability is a great motivator. What I often found, if you have a program that's well developed and then you go out and you get somebody and say, hey, we want you to run this program or this ministry as a deacon. Are they renting that program or do they own that program or that ministry? They're renting it probably, okay? They weren't in on the development of it. They don't have skin in the game. They don't have a personal a personal feeling of involvement with that. So when we would try to bring people in, we would get them involved in the initial planning, get their input, get their commitment to that. And when you do that, in most cases, people then have a sense of ownership in that. And when they do, they'll be self-motivated. They won't require that micromanagement when they own that ministry and having their time and effort invested in that ministry, which means the elders have to spend less time overseeing that ministry, and that valuable time and limited time the elders have can be used in more productive ways. If you can create train up folks that will take a personal interest and own that ministry that they're involved in, they'll be more motivated, they'll be more responsible, they'll be more self-determined, and a lot more can be accomplished with less effort. So I mentioned last week or a couple days ago about the billboard we put up, and we had people involved in designing that billboard and where we were going to put it and all the aspects of that, and when we had it moved after 3 months, when they rotated it around, remember I told you the one deacon came in and said, "Hey, what happened to our billboard? It's not in the same place." He said, our billboard. He didn't say, where's your billboard? Where's the church's billboard? What happened to the billboard? Where's our billboard? I thought, you know what? Glenn owns that. That's local evangelism. Glenn owns that. He's bought into that. So we can do that. We can make an effort to do that. Recruit members with a rifle and not a shotgun. I always cringe when I see somebody stand at the pulpit and make an announcement and say, we need people for this particular project or this ministry. Because what are 90% of the people thinking in that audience?
Some people do that.
He's not talking to me. He's talking to Joe here and Sally. He's not really talking to me, you know. I don't feel any sense of commitment to that. He's just shotgunning it out there. What we found, and just ballparking a 90% probably acceptance rate, when we had work to be done or we wanted to appoint a deacon or a particular ministry or a program, we would meet with them, and it was usually two elders would meet with the individual and his wife or their spouse, and we'd sit down and talk to them in a closed room, private, say, we have this ministry. We believe you have the talent and the expertise and the dedication to make this ministry work for us. And Forest Park needs you to do this. We need your talents in this to do this. And we're asking you to do that. That was so much more effective than just saying, if anybody wants to do this ministry, let us know. That's just not human nature. But you get folks and look them in the eye and say, you are important to this congregation. This is the ministry we think you would be suited for, and you would be a real benefit if you would do this for us. And we'll give you all this. We'll give you the support. We'll finance it. We'll oversee. We'll work with you. And it's so much more effective, in my experience, in doing something like that, as you identify members for ministries, and then you select those people and you work with them, and then you slowly let out that rope of oversight as they get more and more independent, and then you free up more and more time as an eldership to do other things. So I think that's important. Another thing we did, and it's Exhibit 30 in the book, is we did a profile system. We we took one, I think it was a Sunday morning Bible class time, and we asked all the adults to fill out a involvement profile. And basically it said, what's your past experience in all these different ministries and areas? What's your education? What areas do you like? What areas would you like to work in? And we had them all just check the blocks on what they did. So we had that on file. It was pre-computer days, so we didn't have it automated. It was so easy to automate that today. And then what could happen when we had an opening for a primary teacher in the primary school, rather than look out and say, I wonder who we're going to get to do this, all we had to do was go to that involvement profile and look down and say, here's the people that said they had previous experience teaching in primary grades. They wanted to do it again. They had the education. That's the people we went and talked to about, would you like, you said you were interested in the primary group. That's your background. Could you help us out in the third grade for this quarter or this year? And so it made it much more efficient to have that on file. And certainly now with computers, you do an Excel thing, and you pop up all the lists in a particular category, and you've got those names in a minute, and you can start working on folks that have expressed an interest and a desire and a qualification for that ministry. So meet privately and explain why elders believe they are the best choice. We've just talked about that. Consider their responses and thoughtfully encourage them to serve. And we certainly gave them an opportunity to say, what do you think about that? And if they had some concerns about whether they could do it or not, then we certainly listened to those concerns and tried to address those and try to make it possible for them to take on that responsibility. Take responsibility for solving the 80-20 problem. We've talked about that plagues most congregations. We talked about that the other night. What am I doing or not doing as a leader that impedes members from assuming responsibility and reaching new levels of involvement? And we talked about self-examination, that elders do that. And what am I doing? Am I encouraging folks to step up and participate and be involved? Or is there things that I'm doing or saying or not saying that are impeding that progress for folks growing as Christians and involved? And kind of a we would kick that around as a group, as the elders, and then individually we'd look at and who's a good person to ask if you've got any flaws that might be showing. I know my spouse doesn't mind speaking up when when something comes up, and I appreciate that most of the time. But sometimes they see things like, Jim, the tone of voice you used or what you said to so and so. I don't know if that came across right. I didn't notice, I said anything, any different. Well, they can be a big help. It's been my experience, as long as we're humble enough to accept that. Am I matching talents and interests with ministries? And we've talked about that. If we don't do that, then what can happen if we don't make an effort to match talents and interests with ministries? That we just
One person for the job, for a novice in a position that's not qualified.
put a square peg in a round hole, isn't it? What do we do a lot of times in the church?
The right bus and the right seat.
Yeah, right bus in the right seat. What do we do a lot of times in the church when we're under the gun a lot of times? We make that square peg fit into that round hole, don't we? We just push it and turn it and force it in there because we got to get that taken done. We got to move on to the next project. We got to be careful about that. That's not the most effective way in the long run to do that. Am I providing enough authority and responsibility when I'm assigning responsibility or having somebody do something? We have to balance that responsibility with authority we give them. And I've often heard deacons say, they give me this job to do and they hold me accountable, but they won't give me the funds to make it happen, or they won't give me the help to make it happen, or the support, the administrative support to do what they want to do. And I just, then I get chastised, for things not getting done, but they don't give me the support I need to do that. So we have to be careful about that.
Jim?
Yes, sir.
Doesn't what you just mentioned there be with, am I matching talents and interests with ministries? I mean, and then we go back to when you talked about having rotating, jobs for deacons and stuff like that. I mean, if they're not matched up for that particular work, I mean, does that kind of go against that? I mean, they may not have that desire, or they may not fit that particular work for that particular person.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's something that that particular deacon and elders talk about. We want to get you a broader experience on that. We'd like to get you in some area of benevolence or education and that. And if they're absolutely against it, I certainly wouldn't force anybody into that was not comfortable doing that ministry.
If you're not moving and cross-training and moving forward, you're not going anywhere, and something critical happens, you've got nobody qualified to take over that role, and who better is qualified to help you learn a role than somebody's been doing it and doing it well.
And something else you could do, we'd have like an assistant in maybe co-directors of a particular ministry, or an assistant to someone who enjoys that. And we say, why don't you go in there for 6 months or so, and just as an assistant, so you get an understanding of how that ministry works. And we understand it's not your expertise, it's not where you really would like to be, but we want to broaden your experience. And I would tell them too, the end game is we see potential in you for leadership in this congregation, and we want to expose you to other ministries. And so, try to work with them. We're not going to force you to do something you don't want to do, but we want to expose you because we've got plans and we see potential in you to do that. So I think that's something that can be worked out to get that experience. Am I micromanaging a ministry? Now that never happens, does it? Elder never sticks his finger in a ministry, and the deacon can't turn around before the elders saying, well, I had that before you did, and we did it this way. And I think you have to be careful about that, especially if you're an elder who had that responsibility in that ministry before becoming an elder. You have to be careful you don't Ron?
Yeah, I kind of look at that different. I think micromanaging kind of means with each of these men in here that's got a responsibility, that they tend to do the work by themselves. just to get it done. So sometimes they don't get other folks involved.
Don't get other folks involved.
That's the micromanaging. I think
Okay.
I see more than us butting heads with deacons as elders.
Yeah.
But
I-
we just tend to get to work and get it done because it's easier to do that instead of trying to get everybody
Yeah,
involved.
yeah. I think there's both aspects are applicable of that. I think, and that often happens. I know, I've heard many people say, I'm just going to do it myself. I can't get anybody to return my phone calls, so-and-so. My wife's in charge of the Ladies' Day that's coming up here, I think, next weekend, and she's been planning that thing for a year ago. And she had all these committees set up, and, you're going to do this and do that, and all these women committed to all these different, well, what happened to some of those? Didn't return phone calls, didn't get it done, missed deadlines, and she's just, I mean, I didn't think it was funny, but I thought, you're getting a little taste of what some of us men go through in ministries in the church. She said, what am I going to do? And I said, well, you got deadlines to meet. I said, you just have to get it done, okay? And she did. She took some of them on herself and just said, I don't have the time to go get somebody else and try to get them up to speed, so I just do it myself. Yeah, that's a problem in the church, isn't it? Because we're dealing with people. But and that's where I think I would go to the elder and say, I need some help in this. I need you to talk to some of these folks because I can't get them, on board with me to help me out with this. So that's where, elders can have the influence on folks that maybe deacons or others wouldn't have the same influence to get on board. So that's something to think about too. I think that's important. Am I allowing my ego or insecurities to affect my involvement plans for other members? Subconsciously, do I feel that giving up authority and primary responsibility to others diminishes my value in the congregation? Maybe that would never happen, but if folks are getting the job done, do we really care who's doing it or who gets the credit? God gets the credit, isn't it? God gets the glory for everything we do. So that's okay. We have to be careful about that we don't inhibit folks because we have some insecurities about some things. Understand that members are connected to a ministry's success when they're held personally accountable. They see themselves as instruments of their own destiny. Periodic, subtle accountability keeps them on their toes. Pointed questions about the status of their work at monthly, or we did a monthly with the deacons, or periodic meetings during the annual ministry review will better promote performance. And I've always found that accountability, whether it's subtle or pointed, is an excellent motivator for folks if they know they're going to be held accountable. And what I often do is when I would see a deacon or another ministry leader on Wednesdays or Sundays and walk by and say hello, how are you? Every once in a while I'll say, how's that project coming? How's that? Did you get this? Just very casually. And I got the sense they said, you know what? Whitmire's going to ask me about this every week. I'm just going to get it done because I'm tired of having to give him excuses about why it isn't done yet. So I'm just going to get it done, And then it may take, when we had our monthly deacons meetings, we had all the deacons and elders in there, and the elders that were over certain ministries would ask each deacon in front of his peers, what's the status of that clothing drive that we got planned here for next? Are we up to speed on that? What's the status of that new curriculum for the Bible school, or what's the status of this? And they knew every month that they were going to have to answer those questions in front of their peers. And we're just asking for status checks, what's going on. And those folks knew, those deacons, they were sharp enough. They knew they were going to be asked. They didn't want to have to answer it the wrong way in front of their peers without being, and we weren't browbeating anybody, but there's a certain amount of accountability about that. So I think that's a great motivator when it's handled properly. Leaders must understand their task. What are we doing at this level, at this top level of leadership as elders? Determine direction. Strike a balance between leadership styles. As we said, men come into the eldership with different pluses and minuses as far as their background, education, experience, personalities. strike a balance between that. Delegate day-to-day activities. Each man brings a different personality, experience, education, priorities, culture, leadership style to the eldership. And that's the way God intended it. But that has to be somehow assimilated, and that mix has to produce an effective eldership. All of these aspects are of value to the group. The key to success is shepherding the flock is to synergize these traits into the eldership. Many elderships waste an inordinate amount of time on insignificant issues that ought to be handled at a lower level. It used to drive me nuts when we spent 20, 30 minutes trying to figure out who's going to mow the lawn every month or who's going to clean the building. We had more important things to talk about in the eldership than those things. Somebody else below us ought to be talking about that and be delegated that responsibility. So I know, most of our elders worked. A couple of them were retired, but most of them worked like I did and traveled. We have a limited amount of time. We have to prioritize our time to be effective and take care of our families, provide for our families, and our jobs, and our time was extremely valuable. And at that level, we have to be careful we don't get pulled down the weeds, down dealing with minutia and insignificant items that should be dealt with by other folks. Andy?
Like the apostles who said that it's not good for us to stop and wait on tables.
Exactly. That's an exact, perfect example of that. And so what they do, they went out and found 6 qualified men, and they appointed them to do it, and laid hands on them and said, take care of these folks, okay? We got, Lord's got us tasked with other things to do. That's exactly right. So we have to be careful about that because it's easy to get drawn into those insignificant issues. Delegate these to deacons and other members of the church. Continually look for ways. We're just about on time. We're going pretty good. Continue to look for ways to remove obstacles that prevent focus on that direction. Majoring in minors. Always look for ways to make deacons' jobs, ministry leaders' jobs easier, the preachers' jobs easier. How can we set policies and programs and make decisions that will make it easier for folks to carry out their jobs and their responsibilities. Keep responsibility for implementation with the ministry leaders and empowering with the elders. Be careful of upward delegation. And I've got a copy of this. This is an article from the Harvard Business Review. It is one of the 2 top requested articles that they've ever had in the history of this review. It's called Management Time, Who's Got the Monkey? Anybody ever read this? Years ago, I don't know how I came upon this, but when I saw the word delegation, I instantly thought about the eldership. And this is a fascinating article. It's meant for business, but I think it certainly applies to elderships because it talks about upward delegation as well as downward delegation. And I'm going to give this since I only have 1 copy, if you hand that back to one of the elders there, you can find it. If you go to Google and type in Who's Got the Monkey, that article will pop up. You can download it for free, but it's got all kinds of ads and it's 19 pages to do that. They'll sell you a copy for, I think, $8, the Harvard Business Review. But I would tell you, as elderships, I thought the application of what they were teaching in that article, or what they were stressing in that article about delegation, certainly applied to the eldership and the effectiveness of the eldership in the time they have to oversee a congregation. So if you get a chance, especially the elders, I would recommend that you read that article. It'll get your attention, and it's an easy read. Really enjoyed the article. Continue to coach and support after providing direction, removing obstacles, and empowering members. Objective: move from micromanaging to macromanaging as members learn to perform their functions with less and less oversight, freeing the elders time and energy, and we've talked about that. I kind of use the expression "let the rope out." I think about when our kids are 1 or 2 years old. I see you see the ladies usually walking to the supermarket, and some of them have this little contraption they got on that little 2-year-old with a rope, and he can only get about 3 or 4 feet away, so they can make sure they don't lose him. I think about in overseeing congregation and working with folks is that the faster we train them up and get their responsibilities and give them the authority they need, and we can keep letting out that rope and giving them more and more responsibility, which means it takes less and less time for us to oversee them, which means we have time to do other things and be more productive if we can get folks trained up and operating pretty much independently. Let's see, Kyle, I've got 1, 2. I got 3 more pages. Let's go ahead and finish this. Maturing congressional leaders. New elders must understand they have not arrived the day they are appointed to this ever-challenging work. I remember we had 4 regional offices in the command that I was in, and we had one in Kansas and New Jersey and California and one in Atlanta. And the deputies, they each had a regional program manager and had a deputy, and as these regional programs leaders retired, the deputies generally moved up to take that position. And I was good friends with the deputy out in Topeka, Kansas, when I was the deputy, and then the head of the office. And he had a tyrant for a boss. I mean, this guy was like 6'4", big deep voice, and mean as all get out. And he was just an arrogant tyrant. And he took it out on his deputy. I mean, I felt sorry for the guy. Well, when this guy finally retired and the deputy moved up, his attitude was, I have paid my dues putting up with this guy for 10, 15 years, and I'm just going to sit back and relax and enjoy the fact that I'm out here away from everybody. And he did. And he got the reputation quickly of not doing a whole lot, but just skating along and letting his deputy do the work and the other ones, and he didn't get involved. He felt he had arrived, and we can't do that as an eldership. You can't get appointed and think, I've arrived, because you have not. Okay? You've just begun. And I think about Philippians 3:12-14. Some of the words Paul used, not that I have already obtained this or am already perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Jesus Christ made me his own. Brothers, I do not consider it that I have made it on my own. The one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal of the prize of the upward call in Christ Jesus. Look at the words Paul used. Press, strain, push, press. Paul knew that he was an apostle, but he was constantly working and striving and running that race to reach that crown of glory. Allow time to assimilate into the functioning of the eldership. Group dynamics are affected by varying degrees by appointment of new elders. I've never been a fan of appointing multiple elders at the same time. That doesn't mean it's wrong or it's unscriptural, but depending on the number of elders you have, bringing in multiple elders can change the dynamics, the group dynamics of the eldership. And it may not be a positive thing. Now, if bringing 1 or 2, I've seen 2, but I've seen 3 or 4 elders be appointed at one time to an eldership that had 7 or 8 elders in it. Well, you've added 50% increase in the eldership with men that you know, but you know them as deacons or others. They have not worked, they have not been in on the elders meetings, they don't know the dynamics and the relationships of the elders. So I think you have to be careful when you to allow men to assimilate into the group dynamics of the eldership when you do that. And think carefully about appointing a large number of elders that might have an effect on that eldership, that you did unintended consequences of those kind of appointments. I think that's important to keep in mind. I talked a little bit about Psalms 1:1-3, and it talks about as a tree grows, so should a spiritual leader, up, down, and out. It says, blessed is a man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, or stands by the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by the streams of the waters that yields its fruits in the seasons, and its leaf does not wither. We grow down. I think the analogy there is we grow down with our roots. Our roots get stronger when we grow as Christians. Then we grow up closer to God, and we grow out to our fellow man, to the world, to the lost, to our fellow Christians. I think that's important to understand that analogy of what we have to do, what God expects us to do as leaders in the church. Titus 2:11 and 12, for the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all people, training us, keyword training us, to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. We see some responsibilities that we have for that. I'm going to move to the 4 M's of successful, and we'll finish with this and we'll take a break. The 4 M's of leadership. Mentor. Make yourself available formally and informally to teach, encourage, and counsel members. Always be looking for opportunities to be a positive spiritual influence to your flock, whether personally or collectively. Continually be aware of your surroundings and who you're around and how you can influence them. Mentor folks, whether it's a formal mentoring of a potential elder or deacon, or whether it's an informal mentoring as you have opportunity, as you fellowship. Motivate to inspire members with a can-do spirit. As difficult as it will be at times, manifest a positive, upbeat attitude in public. As congregational leaders, you will set the bar for the general attitude of the members. And I have an extra comment here. Members don't know what kind of day you're having. Think about that. I know as I get older, I have more days when I'm a little cranky and I don't feel as good as I used to on a day-to-day basis. But the members don't know that. All they see is how you're acting and what they're seeing from you, from your body language and your voice inflection. They don't know what kind of day you're having or how you feel. So you're influencing as leaders, not just when you're standing in the pulpit or teaching a class or giving every day when you intermingle with members, you're influencing them with your attitude and how you view things, and that permeates the congregation for good or bad. Mingle, spend as much time as possible with the sheep, and we talked about that. You're not part of a professional board of directors behind closed doors, and I've known elderships that operate like that. At least one elder, and in my opinion, should attend major church meetings, including social functions, preferably the elder with primary responsibility for that ministry. And we talked about that the other day for a couple reasons. It shows the interest in the elder and the eldership in that ministry, and encourages those that are responsible for that ministry, and it shows the congregation the support and involvement of elders, and that takes coordination between the elders to try and be available for those functions. Lastly, model. Strive to always be an example to the flock. 1 Corinthians 11:1. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Can you look in the mirror and repeat that verse to yourself? A leader is teaching whenever they are in public, whether they know it or not. Can you say to your congregation, be imitators of me as I am of Christ? That's a challenge, isn't it? That's a humbling experience. Keep that in mind. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll move on to skills and traits of effective leaders.